I never really had a lot of respect for Dave. I mean, he was a good front man of that style, but that wasn't anything I ever wanted to be. Growing up, when I'm saying I'm gonna be a musician.
Have you ever seen two famous rock stars in a fight that wouldn't go away? The fight between Sammy Hagar and David Lee Roth has been going on for decades and is still going strong. When Roth said he was coming out of retirement, Hagar's response was priceless. He laughed so hard he fell off his chair. Why was the answer so strong? What's the real story behind their bad past? Stay tuned as we look into the shocking details of their fight and how it has changed rock history to this day. Why Roth was the enemy. When Sammy Hagar joined Van Halen for the first time, he didn't really like David Lee Roth. In fact, his first thoughts about Roth weren't very good. Roth's over-the-top character didn't affect Hagar, who was already well-known. Roth seemed more like a showman to Sammy than a singer, which was a label that didn't sit well with him. While Hagar liked artists like Clapton, Page, and Jagger, she thought Roth's crazy behavior was fake. It wasn't what Hagar had in mind when he dreamed of becoming a rock and roll star. When he looked at Roth on stage, he saw a show that was definitely fun, but it lacked the musical depth and substance Hagar was looking for. He didn't like the idea of being the life of the party if it meant giving up real talent for showmanship. Making music that felt real was just as important as the songs themselves. Sammy thought that Roth cared more about how the crowd reacted than how the sound was great. Roth's flashy energy, acrobatics, and entertaining stage image were all big parts of Van Halen's early success, but Sammy thought they were very different from what he thought was real music. Hagar loved sounds. He thought that being in a band was more than just putting on a great show. It was about making a rich, complex musical experience. He thought Roth's style was shallow and a quick way to get praise. He liked the way songs could hit deep inside a person's chest, more than the guitar riffs that cut through the air. Hagar's voice was powerful enough that he didn't need to jump off the speakers to make an impression. From his point of view, it wasn't enough to just show off your moves to entertain people. Music had to come first. A fight between characters wasn't the only thing going on here, though. It was a battle for Van Halen's soul. Many Van Halen fans thought that Roth, with his huge showman charm, was the band's heart and soul. But Sammy had a different view. Being a great artist was more important to him than being a rock star. Roth's anger toward Hagar wasn't just about style, it was about the bigger picture. Van Halen could be more than just a party band. Their sound could be the next step in rock music, a mix of technical skill and soul. Roth's effect on the band definitely brought them to the public's attention, but Hagar thought they could go even further if Roth didn't get involved. Hagar came from a place where the music was more important than the artist. He did not want to be the show. Instead, he wanted to be the band that always made you think, feel, and hear something new. Van Halen had to get inside Sammy's head and play strong, heavy music that would stand the test of time instead of flashy music. The thing is, this isn't just about style. When Sammy joined Van Halen, it wasn't just a new chapter. It was the start of a whole new band. It was the start of the feud that would split Van Halen fans for good. Roth had a lively stage demeanor, but Hagar focused on the depth of the music. This wasn't just a change in vocals, it was a change in direction. Van Halen could have stayed true to the wild, untamed energy that Roth brought, or they could have moved towards something more polished and mature. Sammy wasn't just going to join a band, he was going to question what it stood for. They were having trouble with each other for more than just different artistic tastes. It was very close to home. Roth was proud to be a rock star, and he was about to fight Hagar, who appreciated music more than anything else. This disagreement would not only affect their time in the band, but it would also start a feud that would last for decades. When Hagar joined Van Halen, there was no clear way to move forward. One thing was for sure, though, the ride wouldn't be easy. Everything changed when he got there. Fans also had to make a choice. Were they just there for the show, or were they ready for a new age of heavy music? Both the question and the competition would continue to cause heated arguments. And this is where things get really hot. When Sammy and Roth got into a fight over their different musical tastes, the real nature of their rivalry became clear. But what happened next wasn't just a fight of egos. Things were about to get personal in ways that no one saw coming. As you can see, the fight between Sammy Hagar and David Lee Roth started over music. But things were about to get much worse. And it wasn't just about music anymore. What happened when they were both in the news again in 2002? That's where the real action starts. The mask behind the charisma. David Lee Roth was the rock star, not just the lead singer. He made a name for himself by having a personality that screamed everything crazy about the 1980s. Cocky, sure of himself, and doing crazy things. Just a smile and a high kick from Roth would be enough to fill a stadium. He didn't just have great music skills, he was bigger than life, which drew people in. Roth was meant to be bold in everything he did, from the clothes he wore to his hair to the way he moved on stage. Everything he did was a show that demanded attention. He was the epitome of rock and roll excess. He didn't say sorry for his actions. People loved Roth's look and Van Halen's music so much for years that they couldn't imagine one without the other. His loud personality became the band's brand, and in many ways he shaped the wild, uncontrolled image of the genre. But fans loved him for more than just his music. He had a lot of charm that made every show an unforgettable experience. But here's the catch. Sammy Hagar, who took over as lead singer of Van Halen after Roth left, saw a different side of this rock god. He saw what he thought was a carefully put-together front behind the high-flying tricks and the constant smile. He didn't see Roth as the carefree, spontaneous character that fans loved. Instead, he saw him as a master manipulator whose larger-than-life personality hid a more egotistical side. Roth was definitely attractive, but Hagar couldn't get past the fact that the man he saw behind the stage wasn't really into music. He just wanted to be the center of attention. People found Roth's showiness interesting, but Sammy thought it took away from what he saw as a lack of content. He didn't believe Roth's rock star persona. To him, it was all just smoke and mirrors, a way for Roth to hide his insecurities and fight for power, both in the band and in the eyes of everyone else. Roth's public image started to show cracks as Hagar worked with him more, especially on their co-headlining tour in 2002. As Hagar always looked at things more closely, she saw that Roth's carefree image was just a mask that he had carefully made to hide the more competitive and insecure side of him. Roth's ego was always trying to make him look better than everyone else. Hagar noticed that Roth seemed to be trying to show who was bossy in every exchange off stage, from how he acted in interviews to how he interacted with the backup band. Hagar saw that Roth wasn't just interested in the attention, he was consumed by it. Roth cared more about making and keeping up his rock star reputation than making the band really get along. This made Sammy mad, because he thought that in a band, everyone should work together and respect each other. The longer Hagar was with Roth, the more he saw a man who was filled with himself. Sammy thought Roth's fierce competition wasn't just about being the best. It was also about being bigger than everyone else. It was a stressful and unhealthy situation where no one felt appreciated unless they were boosting Roth's reputation. Sammy was especially disappointed by Roth's tendency to play the victim. Hagar, on the other hand, thought Roth's leaving Van Halen wasn't the band's fault. It was Roth's choices that left them hanging. Even though Roth loved being the best showman, Sammy couldn't help but think that it cost him something. Hagar thought that the real Roth was someone whose ego was so big that it overshadowed everything else, from his singing to his relationships with the other band members. For Hagar, Roth's need to be in charge wasn't just about becoming a rock star, it was a sign of a greater insecurity that he could never get away from. But here's the catch. This feud wasn't just because Hagar thought Roth was rude or annoying. It was a clash of ideas. Hagar really cared about the music, what the band stood for, and how everyone respected each other's skills. Roth, on the other hand, was motivated by something different. He needed to be accepted. Roth was more interested in his place in the rock canon, while Hagar wanted to make Van Halen's music more complicated. Not only did these guys have different ideas about art, but they also had different ideas about how they should play their part in the band. Even though their relationship was changing, it was clear that they were still having problems with each other. The most shocking thing, though? When Sammy and Roth fought on stage, their feud was tearing not only their relationship apart, but also Van Halen. What did they do when they had to share the stage once more? Things became even more personal as the anxiety rose to a high point. Let's look into what really happened on their wild tour in 2002. The 2002 tour. The co-headlining tour between David Lee Roth and Sammy Hagar in 2002 was supposed to heal old scars and bring the two famous frontmen back together, but it was anything but a happy reunion. The two bands didn't work together to bring back the magic of Van Halen's early years. Instead, their rivalry got stronger, starting a deeper, more personal feud that fans and band members could feel. At first, the idea of trying to work together for the love of rock and roll seemed like a good idea. But soon, it turned into a competition to see who could be the best frontman, both on stage and off. When Hagar took over for Roth in Van Halen in 1985, he was never afraid to say what he thought about Roth's exit or the way he played. He had been critical of Roth's acting for a long time because he thought it took away from the music. The 2002 tour was no different. Hagar used the chance to say mean things about Roth's singing. When asked about Roth, Hagar didn't hold back in interviews. He called Roth out for what he saw as a lack of voice control and a focus on show over substance. Sammy, who is known for his powerful singing and playing of the guitar, couldn't help but think that Roth's way of doing things was, in his words, a distraction from the music, which was the real point of the band. Hagar didn't just criticize Roth's voice, he also didn't like how Roth seemed to always want attention. Sammy was a professional guitarist who cared about the quality of his work. For him, Roth was still the flashy showman he had been in the 1980s. He cared more about keeping up his rock star image than growing as an artist. When Hagar made mean comments about Roth's skills, it wasn't just a jab at his performance, it was a deeper, more personal dig at Roth's public image. Hagar wasn't just fighting Roth on stage, he was also battling his inflated sense of self and his refusal to see how important it is for band members to work together. But that wasn't the end of the complaints. Roth's pranks were seen as a distraction by more than just Hagar. Many of the band's fans noticed how different the two frontmen were, and some of them started to wonder if Roth's performance was still as good as it used to be. Roth was definitely there, but his over-the-top acting couldn't hide the fact that, in Hagar's eyes, he was nothing like the person he used to be. It was clear that Roth had trouble singing, and Hagar wasn't afraid to point that out. Their already tense relationship got even worse because of the public criticism, and it didn't take long for it to show up in their tour acts. The electricity on stage during the 2002 tour was, to say the least, high. The project that was supposed to be a team effort turned into a competition for attention very quickly. Roth had built his career on high-flying tricks and charm, so he wasn't going to let Hagar take the lead. Van Halen used to be known for his dramatic stage appearance, but Hagar's performance style was more focused and polished. Roth jumped, kicked, and flipped. But Hagar ruled the stage with his powerful voice and calmer energy. Roth could definitely get people excited with his crazy antics, but Hagar's controlled, powerful vocals and stage personality gave the show a different vibe. As the tour went on, it became clear that both men wanted to be in charge. They were each trying to do better than the other to show who really deserved to be in charge of the band. Roth's flashy image, which came from years of performing, ran into Hagar's professionalism and vocal precision head-on. It wasn't just about singing, it was about who could keep the people watching interested. Roth's style was all about showmanship, while Hagar focused on the music and giving a performance that showed off the band's skills instead of using tricks. The resulting tension was obvious, and the audience could pick up on the fact that the two frontmen were really against each other. Both men had fans, but it became clearer in every show that they were competing for the attention. Roth's fans, who thought he was the best rock and roll lead singer ever, couldn't help but cheer him on as he did his crazy things. But Hagar's fans, who admired how well he played the guitar and how he could bring something new to the band, cheered for him just as loudly. Not only was the venue electric, but it was also charged with rivalry. And it wasn't just about the music anymore. A fight broke out over who could lead Van Halen on stage and be seen as the real boss. The constant stress hurt not only the two lead singers, but also the whole band. The competitive spirit made a rift, and each show became more about individual glory than about the artistry of the group as a whole. Once a group that worked well together, the band was now split up by the egos of its lead singers. The fight for power took precedence over the music, which should have been the main focus. Fans could tell. Instead of coming together to honor Van Halen's legacy, the 2002 tour turned into a place where two rock stars could fight in public and in private, and neither was ready to back down. Roth's ego and the band's unity. Not only did David Lee Roth's pranks on stage make Sammy Hagar mad, but his constant need to be in charge wore him down too. Roth had a big ego that wouldn't go away. Roth had to be the center of attention everywhere they went. Sammy couldn't help but feel that the attention was never on the music or the band as a whole, but always on Roth and his reputation. Sammy thought Roth cared more about being better than everyone else than about bringing Van Halen together. There was more to Sammy than just putting on a great show. He also cared about making songs that would last, and Roth's need to be approved of all the time got in the way of that. What made Sammy mad was that Roth didn't seem to care about the direction of the band as a whole. Roth seemed stuck in his own world, putting his own image ahead of the artistic teamwork that Hagar thought the band needed. Sammy, on the other hand, was ready to work with others and grow. Sammy wanted to take the band to new artistic heights, give them new ideas, and make their sound better. Roth, on the other hand, was nuts about keeping up his image as the crazy lead singer and rock star that everyone loved. This wasn't just a difference in taste for Sammy. It was a clash of fundamental beliefs. Sammy thought it was getting in the way of the band's future, and it made him mad. Things were not much better behind the scenes. During his time with Roth, Sammy got the impression of a deeply self-centered person who cared more about keeping up his rock star image than adding to the band's creative process. It wasn't about having an ego, it was about not wanting to give in. Roth wanted to be the star of every show, and that desire showed in how he acted and how he treated everyone else. Roth was always trying to get the attention, even when the band was supposed to be working together. So Sammy saw him as competing both on and off stage. Not only did they have to be the best performer, they had to be the only performer that counted. Sammy was always aware of how Roth's need to be in charge changed the way the band worked. It wasn't just how he acted on stage. Roth was mean to everyone in the band, from Eddie to the road crew. Hagar began to think that everyone at work was constantly trying to perform better than others and care more about their image than working together to make something bigger. It wasn't good to compete in this way. It was harmful. It was very tiring. Members of the band should have been sharing ideas and creativity, but Roth was always focused on being the best, which sapped their creativity. To Sammy, working with others was very important. He didn't get how someone could be so focused on their own reputation that they would risk the band's future. Hagar was angry about more than just her pride. She was angry about disrespect. Roth didn't respect him, and it was becoming clear that Roth didn't respect him either. Sammy didn't want to be the center of attention, but he did want to be treated like a real member of the band, and not like he was there to fill in for Roth. Not only did this bad relationship hurt Sammy, but it also hurt the whole band. It was almost impossible for people to work together artistically because they were always fighting for power, not getting along, and the spotlight. The band that used to be strong on new ideas and shared success was now split, which was hard for Sammy to deal with. Roth's ego was more than just a bother. It got in the way of what Van Halen stood for. Egos, anger, and personal grudges were drowning out the energy and joy that had once made their music great. Sammy started to understand that this wasn't a small problem. It was a major issue that could not be ignored. The band was no longer working well together because Roth had to be in charge all the time, and it became clearer as Sammy stayed that things were not going to change. But this wasn't just a story about egos. It was also the final test of respect and loyalty. Things got much darker as their feud grew, and it wasn't just about music anymore. The next part will talk about how the tension finally got worse and what that means for Van Halen's future. Believe me, things are about to get even more dramatic. Hagar's final word on Roth's return. Sammy Hagar didn't respond the way many people might have thought he would when they heard that David Lee Roth was coming out of retirement to go on the road again. Instead of the expected friendship or even lack of interest, Hagar laughed so hard that he fell off his chair. For Sammy, Roth's return wasn't a victorious comeback. It was just another part of the show that was Roth's whole career. Hagar's answer made it clear that he wasn't pleased and wasn't ready to put the issue behind them. Their rivalry started in the 1980s and has been going strong for decades. Roth's return only stoked the fire of their long-standing rivalry. For Hagar, Roth was still the same old showman who cared more about the show than the work. Not only was Roth's music important when he was on stage, but he also filled the room with his personality, antics, and obvious charm. Roth was great at making moments that held people's attention, but Hagar didn't think that was enough to support his position at the top. Sammy thought that being a musician was more than just flash and fire. He believed in making music that would last and not depending on a big personality to carry the band's success. Hagar wasn't saying Roth hadn't made a mark on rock history, but he thought Roth's impact was more about showmanship than music. This point of view wasn't just based on anger. It came from Hagar's strong belief in how important music proficiency was. Sammy had spent years working on his singing and making complicated musical projects with other people. He thought Roth's style took away from the real work. Hagar thought that being a real artist meant more than just putting on a good show and getting people to cheer. It meant getting into the music and pushing the limits of what was possible on stage and in the studio. Roth was very attractive, but Hagar didn't want to be like Roth as a leader. Hagar thought Roth was stuck in the past and making use of old tricks to stay relevant instead of growing as an artist. When Roth told Hagar that he was coming back, it was a clear reminder of how different they had always been. Sammy's career had reached new heights, both musically and financially. Roth's return could have been seen as a moment of nostalgia. But Hagar couldn't get rid of the feeling that Roth was just trying to hold on to the glory of the past. Roth had been the face of Van Halen for many years, but Sammy thought that was the end of that story. Now, Roth's attempt to reclaim the center seemed more like a desperate attempt to keep up a public image than a real attempt to move the band's music forward. Even though they were angry at each other, Hagar couldn't deny Roth's role in the band's success. It's clear that Roth had a big impact on Van Halen's early years. His huge stage presence helped the band become famous, and it was largely due to his impact. For Hagar, though, the question stayed, was it enough? Could someone's image carry the weight of a band's history by itself? Or did the music need to change and grow? For Sammy, it was the second one. Hagar and Roth were rivals because they had different ideas about what a band should be like, not just who was a better singer. Roth was a symbol of the time in rock and roll when personality, show, and breaking rules in a crazy, unpredictable way were important. Hagar, on the other hand, represented the rock style that was all about music, physical skill, and working together. This difference wasn't just in how they felt about music, it was emotional. The excitement and chaos that Roth brought to the stage were what made him famous. On the other hand, Hagar changed Van Halen's sound and helped them become more popular. So what's left after decades of conflict, rivalry, and trouble? The competition between Hagar and Roth is, without a doubt, one of the most important events in rock history. It has shaped Van Halen's history, with each lead singer leaving an indelible mark on the group's character. But their feud has had a lasting effect on fans and the rock world as a whole, not just on the music. Some people think that Roth is what Van Halen is all about. He was the wild and uncontrolled lead singer who gave the band's music a raw edge. His legacy includes chaos, excitement, and acts that seemed like they were not real. Others see Van Halen's work during Hagar's time as their finest example. His refined singing skills and dedication to music took the band to new heights, making them more appealing to mainstream crowds while still living up to the hard rock promise. Fans have always been very split into two groups, Team Roth and Team Hagar. Each group has a very different idea of what Van Halen stood for. The fight between these two frontmen has been a hot topic of conversation for years, and it still is as both men think about their past. It's not just about who could act better, it's also about what each frontman meant to the band's culture. Because Roth and Hagar were competing with Van Halen, the band had to change and adapt to stay current as musical styles and eras changed. To this day, the competition still shapes the lives of both men. Roth's return from retirement is the latest event in a long story of rivalry, recognition, and reconciliation. However, Hagar's response shows that the wounds between them are still very fresh. We don't know if Roth's return will have the same effect as his earlier years, but one thing is for sure. The rivalry that began decades ago will never really go away. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Hagar-Roth rivalry, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And be sure to click on the next video popping up on your screen for more rock drama.